This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. The world is on a tailspin and inflation is leading many nations to tighten spending, a fact that reduces liquidity. In Africa, many are having a hard time living on salaries and wages that have been stagnant for years. We can look at the factors that have led to the dwindling of the middle class in the continent's largest economy. And today is Money Monday. Of course, we have some great conversation. Have you ever considered a side hustle? We'll talk about what it takes to start one later on in the show. Let's start with the African business headlines. Tanzania has doubled the cost of export permits by 93%, a move likely to open another round of trade disputes between Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. According to border officials, authorities in Tanzania have increased the cost of acquiring export permits from the previous 27,000 Tanzanian shillings per truck to 52,000. The move caused a huge backup of trucks moving to Kenya in the last week as traders and truckers were caught off guard by the new requirement. The Kenya Ports Authority is investing 2.7 billion Kenyan shillings in an upgrade of handling equipment at the Lamu Sea Port. KPA says the multi-billion shilling investment program at the Lamu South Sudan-Ethiopia transport corridor seeks to increase capacity and improve operational efficiency. The corridor is a crucial Kenya Vision 2030 flagship project and is expected to transform regional economies through increased trade, integration, and interconnectivity spanning South Sudan and landlocked Ethiopia and beyond. Over the next 7 years, the Transnet National Ports Authority intends to invest 9.1 billion rand in a number of infrastructure improvement projects at 3 ports, including East London and Port Elizabeth. The most recent investment goals are a part of its capital investment program, which aims to realign Transnet with important economic sectors. The first investment injection of 570 million rand will be made during the 2022-2023 financial year. This first installment will go to the location of the tank farm from Port Elizabeth, as well as phase 1 of a manganese export terminal development, conducting a feasibility study for the reconstruction of East London's Qua 3 and the construction of a slip line at the Port Elizabeth terminal. According to government numbers, Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate accelerated to 191.6% in June, more than twice the rises in consumer prices from 2 months prior. The situation happened despite President Emerson Mnangagwa's promise that the government would announce new measures to address the rising cost of living. The rate of inflation, which was 96.4% in April, increased to almost 200% as a result of the surge in the price of bread and cooking oil, brought on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While the energy regulator announced a second increase in gas prices in a month on Friday, in an attempt to stop price increases, the central bank has opened up access to foreign currency for bakeries due to the skyrocketing cost of basic items like bread. According to the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and an organization in charge of finding oil spills, as well as at a well run by the local Nigerian company Eraton Exploration and Production Limited, it has been spewing gas and oil into the Niger Delta for more than a week. Through the Nembe Creek trunk line, Eraton produces and exports crude from the OML 18 block. Now, prior to being successfully shut off last year, an area well operated by Ato Eastern EMP spewed oil for more than a month and contaminated the Delta rivers. And finally, in a related development, Nigeria will issue prospecting licenses on Tuesday to companies that won rights to develop marginal oil fields some 2 years after authorities sought bids for the oil blocks. Marginal fields are smaller oil blocks located onshore and in shallow waters and are typically developed by local companies. Gbenga Komolafe, head of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, said in a statement that issuing the licenses was one of the most critical tasks for the agency, which was established last year after Nigeria passed a new petroleum law. And right after the break, many countries look to those in the middle class for a stable source of demand for goods and services, as well as economic growth. But what happens when the middle class starts to decrease? We'll get into what's happening with Nigeria's middle class after the break. The middle class is a socioeconomic strata that falls in between the working class and the upper class. A strong and prosperous middle class is crucial for any successful economy and cohesive society. The middle class sustains consumption. It drives much of the investment in education, health, and housing, and it plays a key role in supporting social protection systems through its tax contributions. For many years, Nigeria had a strong and vibrant middle class that has helped the country grow and pushed economic development. But the same middle class is struggling now, with several factors making it difficult for more Nigerians to join the middle class, and those same factors pushing others out of that level. A recent report by SBM Intelligence has highlighted the crucial role the middle class plays and shares recommendations on what needs to be done to reverse the trend. Joining me from Hull in the United Kingdom is Cheta Nwanze. He's a partner at SBM Intelligence. Cheta, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's start with this, because there seems to be a bit of variation in what it meant to be middle class just maybe 2 or 3 decades ago in Nigeria's history versus what it means to be middle class right now. So would you say that the definition of a middle class Nigerian has changed? What are some of the socioeconomic indicators that would put one in this current generation's middle class?
Yeah, that's a good question. The socioeconomic indicators of being a middle class person in Nigeria have definitely changed. The bar has fallen lower. And it has fallen with the rise in inflation and the fall in the value of the naira. Nowadays, based on the report by the NPS in 2019, the average Nigerian earns, give or take, about 375 naira per day, or has about 375 naira per day to spend, which translates to 11,450 naira a month, which translates to about 137,400 naira per year. In dollar terms, that has gone down. So that 375 naira nowadays is, give or take, about 50 cents. What this means, this is median income for Nigerians. So what this means is that if you are earning minimum wage now, which is 30,000 naira where it is paid, then you are middle class. That's a very poor bar to be at, but it's what it is. That's 30,000 naira, give or take, nowadays about $200. It's not even up to $200. It's about $50, really. So it's really poor. The middle class in Nigeria is shrinking, and most middle class people, you and I included, are being hit by a variety of factors. I'm sure that you must have noticed that what you spend on food in the markets every month on a month-on-month basis has been going up. So that's it. The middle class is shrinking because more and more people are falling into poverty. Bear in mind that the UN's standard for poverty is $1.25 expenditure per day. And we're talking of people, most Nigerians having 50 cents to spend. So that's where it is. That's where we are.
So in terms of this, even though we see, unfortunately, a dwindling middle class, let's also talk about the fact of that the middle class is important. It's a key driver of economic growth for a country such as Nigeria. But beyond that economic growth, why else is it a concern for us that Nigeria's middle class is declining?
It's not just because of the economics, even in terms of sociopolitics, in terms of expenditure. But back to economics, it's the middle class that typically has discretionary income, which would then drive other sectors of the economy. It's people in the middle class that will spend money that will trickle down to the lower classes and hopefully help raise the standard of living of the lower classes. Unfortunately, if the middle class is dwindling and people are beginning to hoard, which is a polite way of saying that people are beginning to just conserve cash because they don't have it to spend, they don't have discretionary income, then there will be less left for the lower classes, and that means that more people will be trapped in that cycle of poverty. Basically, it's supposed to be some form of trickle-down economics where the middle class has some discretionary income to spends it on things like transport, on things like entertainment. Unfortunately, we are living in a situation where fewer and fewer people are having less money to spend on those things. A survey that we conducted some years ago, that was back in 2019, indicated that most people in Nigeria spent the majority of their income on food. Basically, 63% of Nigerians spent most of their money on food, and once they spend money on food, then they don't have money to spend on anything else. 2019 was 3 years ago. This survey I'm talking about was in June 2019, and since then things have gotten a lot worse. So it is it is pretty much unarguable that people have fallen into this. That more people have fallen into this poverty trap, where basically once they spend on food, they don't have much money to spend on anything else.
And you made mention of something earlier, but I know that in some quarters it's called socioeconomic mobility, or the opportunity for people at lower classes to move upwards. And when we look at it, it's also an indicator of the growth of an economy and how people can stay in the middle class, and how people who might be considered lower class in terms of economics and income are able to also move into the upper level. So what does it tell you about Nigeria's economy when you have more people falling into poverty and more people from the middle class also then going further down as well?
Unfortunately, we've been stuck in a period of low growth for a long time. In real terms, we've been in the recession for at least 8 years now. When I say real terms, what I mean is that our economic growth rate has never, or has not been consistently growing up. Our economy has not been consistently growing up with population growth rates. So when you have more people being added to the population, but the economy is not growing as fast, in relative terms, then the economy is actually shrinking, and that's what has been happening in Nigeria for a bit now, at least over the last 8 years thereabouts. When the economy isn't growing as fast as population, it means that more people are falling into poverty, and we're seeing in numbers. In absolute terms, Nigeria has the highest number of people who are living in extreme poverty, even higher than India, which has a population 7 times the population of Nigeria.
All right, so Cheta, we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we'll look at some of the indicators of what is happening now in terms of how the middle class is being, some would say, endangered. And then we'll also look at the fact that many of Nigeria's economic issues are historic. So beyond being historic, what does the future lie for the middle class and much more? Now, at the time of Nigeria's independence, the country had a thriving middle class. The naira was almost equal to the dollar and pound. But right now, it's £1 to over 500 naira and $1 to over 400 naira, at least at the official windows. What happens when this now starts affecting Nigeria's middle class? The conversation continues after this. And still with me today is Cheta Nwanze. He is the partner, SBM Intelligence, as we look at the issues affecting Nigeria's middle class. Now, we said earlier that Nigeria's issues are historic. The country has had single-digit inflation in only 25 of the country's 62 years post-independence. So going on 37 years, Nigeria has struggled with double-digit inflation. So, Cheta, let me bring you back in here. What would be the consequence of this, or what is the consequence we're seeing, given the fact that for the majority of Nigeria's independent life or independent lifespan, it has anticipated, it has felt, it has dealt with double-digit inflation?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that we highlighted in our report, the fact that it's only 40% of the time since, I would prefer to say, the withdrawal of the British rather than independence, but that's a completely different conversation. It's only 40% of that time that we've had single-digit inflation. What this means is that value in Nigeria has been consistently destroyed. When you have the kind of inflationary pressures that we've had for a long time, if we look at the current inflation numbers, what it means for food inflation, which is at about 20%, it means that the current bowl of rice that you ate this morning, the cost will double in about 4.5 years. That's essentially what it means. That means that value has been a problem. We've not been able to store value. Nigeria is not a place to store value. If you brought in $1 million, for example, to invest in Nigeria in 1980, that $1 million would be worth, give or take, about just over $100,000 now. That's destruction of value. That means that Nigeria has been a factory for poverty over the years. It's something that we need to work on seriously, but unfortunately, our policies do not seem to take this into reality. Nigeria, by design, was designed to service only a very narrow elite, and we've not done anything since 1960 to change that design. Instead, we've doubled down on it. We basically create wealth, and what we see is a massive wealth transfer from the lower classes to the upper classes.
So you made mention of the fact that the majority of Nigerians spend upwards of 60% of whatever income is generated on food, and also the food inflation numbers. In May 2022, it stood at 18.37%, leading to an increase in the price of staple foods like bread, rice, and even the local produce like gari that is in almost every Nigerian household. If the country cannot successfully feed people, can Nigeria have any likelihood of even bringing poverty to an end?
No, that's a short answer.
And the long answer?
The long answer is that as long as we continue with the destructive policies that we have, we'll keep manufacturing, and I use that expression again, we'll keep manufacturing poverty. And ultimately, we'll get to a point where there will be basically endless social unrest. Right now, we're having quite a bit of social unrest in the country, but it hasn't yet, it appears to not have reached a level where the elites care about it. They still think that they can basically hide behind they live in their gilded cages. But the kind of social unrest that we could possibly see if inflation continues like this, there's a reason why Germany, as an example, for them, inflation is something that they take extremely seriously. The moment inflation gets to 7% in Germany, it becomes a cabinet level issue. And that's because they have a history where they had hyperinflation during the Weimar Republic between 1919 and 1929. And then they ended up with Adolf Hitler. So for them, they understand that if you have the kind of inflation, uncontrolled inflation, that we have been seeing in Nigeria for a very long time, you will end up on one day with the kind of government that will destroy the country, or with the kind of conditions, let me not say, because it may not necessarily be the government itself, but you will likely end up with the kind of conditions that will end up destroying the country, absolutely. And in many respects, I think that's where we're very close to that point in Nigeria at the moment. At
the precipice. So you've mentioned destructive policies, or policies that do not actually take aim at the issues at hand. And while government is a continuum, administrations have policies and they have targets that they set for themselves, particularly for the outgoing administration now, which has 11 months left. What do you think are some of the policies they've gotten? What do you think are some of the policies they've gotten wrong that unfortunately have added to the historic challenges that Nigeria's economy and therefore the middle class are now facing?
Let's start with the border closure. The border closure is, I think, is a signature policy that the current administration enacted that was very counterproductive, and they doubled down on it for over a year. There was no reason why those borders should have been closed for even one day. But historically, there are two policy choices that Nigeria has generally made, at least since the 1970s, that have resulted in destruction of value and are politically very difficult because as a people, we bought into them. Number one, the energy subsidies, the petrol subsidy. So you have a situation where Nigeria's non-oil income last year, 2021, was give or take about 5.5 trillion naira. As of May this year, we had already spent 4 trillion naira on subsidy. Essentially, we had spent more than 80% of our entire non-oil revenue in 2021 on subsidy, not even in the first 6 months of 2022, which doesn't give us money to do anything else. The second one is this addiction to a strong naira. Basically, we believe that having a strong naira is a sign of a healthy economy. It's not. The best examples I can give, South Korea and Japan, and even China, their currencies are not strong in the way we hope that we keep insisting that our naira must be strong. So when you have such policies, the subsidy, the strong naira thing, and then the border closure, you have to spend money to sustain them. And we are not productive enough to have the money that we're spending. So essentially, it's a situation where, as I said earlier, the country only works for a very, very narrow elite and not for the generality of Nigerians.
So very quickly, as we wrap up this conversation, is there some hope? Because when you see a dwindling middle class, it also leads to things like the brain drain. And Nigeria is in the midst of another brain drain right now, having previously experienced one sometimes in the late 1960s into the early 1970s. We're in the middle of that right now. You see a middle class. People are selling everything they can. Families are mortgaging everything they can to be able to send at least one member of their family abroad. You're having brain drain. You're having a middle class that's struggling. And we know that at least one Nigerian income caters for upwards of 5 to 6 or 7 people even. Is there hope for the middle class?
The short answer is, so that's a complicated question. As always with some of these things, there's a short-term answer, there's a medium-term answer, and there's a long-term answer. The short-term answer is, at this point, no. I think that we are now in a position in the core where the only way is down for some time until we start getting sensible policies. Unfortunately, Nigeria right now, because of the long election period and all of that, Nigeria is adrift and without a captain. As long as we have that, things will only get worse. But the medium-term hope would be whoever succeeds President Buhari next year would immediately roll up his sleeves and get working. But again, that is completely dependent on who succeeds the president and whether the person has the political will to do some of the things that are necessary from day one. If the person doesn't have that political will to do these things that are necessary from day one, then we'll have 4 to 8 years of being in the wilderness. And unfortunately, as with economic stuff, it compounds over time. So if we have, we've not yet seen the results of some of President Buhari's really bad policies. We'll see the results over the next 2 to 3 years. So imagine adding, if we make the wrong choice next year, and then adding somebody that will compound those problems, it will only compound and push the can down the road.
All right, Cheta and Nwanze, we'll leave the conversation at that. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And it is a startling conversation to have with the continent's largest economy, a large economy, a dwindling middle class, a fuel shortage that comes up often, and of course, those naira to dollar, naira to pound, naira to international currency conversations. And it continues to be one that adds pressure to the Nigerian income. You're watching Business Edge. Lekan Onabanjo has the international business news coming for you right after the break.